Hey there folks, welcome to Spectrum Pulse. We talk about music, movies, art, and culture. And today we're going to be talking about the debut album from Anna Meredith, titled Varmints. So on the topic of musical genres that I've been neglecting, I haven't covered as much electronic music as I'd like this year. And again, I wouldn't say all this is my fault. There hasn't really been any records from that space in 2016 where the hype has blown me out of the water, outside of that Kygo record that keeps getting delayed, and yeah, I probably will cover it. So I figured I'd go deep into the indie scene to find something, and here's where we hit a bit of a snag. See, there's been some buzz surrounding the long-awaited debut album from British producer and composer Anna Meredith, who's performed alongside James Blake, has been making some big splashes in music over the past 10 years in classical music. And this makes more sense than you would expect. In recent years, there's been a surprising number of crossovers between classical music and the electronic scene, especially on the avant-garde side where melodic experimentation is much more prevalent. And here's where I have to confess that despite having a classical background in theory and piano, the more I delve into classical music and opera, the more I keep discovering how woefully incomplete my knowledge is. And that's one reason I've always shied away from covering more jazz records. As much as I'm coming to like and appreciate the genre, I feel that there's so much more history and albums that I need to absorb before I can consider myself a credible critic of that genre. I'll confess to having a little bit more knowledge built up over the past few years with electronic music, but I did not expect Anna Meredith to make things easy. This is a woman who has written operas and orchestral arrangements. If she was going to electronic music, we could be getting some out there stuff, but might as well have a challenge for once, so I dug into her debut album, Varmints. What do we get? Well, I'll say this might be one of the hardest albums that I've ever had to evaluate. And let me stress that Varmints is not an easy listen either, blurring the lines between classical and electronic with the poise and power that can hit you like a ton of bricks or a small avalanche. Classicists will be perturbed by the off-kilter electronic wobbles and howling guitars. Electronic music fans will be thrown off by the odd pop sensibility that runs through certain tracks or the intricate classical bending of the compositions, and most pop music fans will probably run for the hills. But something kept drawing me back to this album. And the more I dug into it in detail, the more I found one of the most powerfully tragic and achingly sad electronic records that I've heard in years. And even that feels inadequate to describe. There's so many powerful emotions that go through this album, full of cryptic endings that retain their intimacy but mean so much more, feels so much bigger. In other words, while this album definitely is one that requires a lot to decode and really get used to, it's probably going to end up being one of the best albums of this year. No jokes there at all. It's amazing. So how do you even start talking about an album like this? Well, the first will come in the composition, where the most classical influences come through, and where this album will feel the most disconcerting to fans of more conventional electronic music. While there are those thicker beats and dubstep-esque bass wobbles and some phenomenal live drums, the first thing that you'll notice is that there's something in the cadence that can feel a little bit off in comparison to the melody lines driven by the fast, brittle synths or the ebbing, borderline chiptune wobbles. And that's not even touching on when the strings break in to form a frantic sawing mower galloping the songs forward, or the heavy, brassy horns adding a symphonic, borderline cinematic climax to these tracks. Hell, even when the horns seem to build to a conventional form of bombast like on Nautilus, your ear is drawn to the different melodic cadences as the layering changes, even as the melodies themselves barely change at all. Many critics have drawn comparison how off-kilter and deranged this supposedly sounds, but with more listens, it lets you unpack the patterns. You realize how much of this just fits together seamlessly in the compositional level. The high jittery keys mirrored on a slower cadence in the strings or mid-range synths, or the squealing noisy guitars. And keep in mind that Meredith isn't shying away from the shifting elements that normally don't evolve much beyond an established pattern in conventional electronic music. Tempo and beat change-ups nested within each other, to say nothing of a superb control of musical dynamics that allows the songs to expand and contract organically while still maintaining real interweaving melodic patterns. There's a lot of intricacy in the composition that's incredible here, and really I can rave about it all day from a technical point of view, but in order to make these tracks feel as fully fleshed out as they do, there's also a superb command of instrumental tone and production. How the watery rollick of the guitar on Taken is allowed to evolve as the bass is allowed to roil and the snare drum pickup gets sharper, the very sniff beat on R-Type, and it's the harsh wind-touch fragments against the drum cadences and sawing strings ratchet up the tension to match the cascading chiptune that dissolves into these heavily compressed guitar layers, or on Shill, where the off-kilter melodic sequencing eventually fuses into one of the most potent climax moments you will hear this year. And then we have the Vapours, probably my favorite track for taking a great little guitar lick and then working it through layers of mirroring through the strings and the Arion-esque synth tones with whirring, galloping percussion and bass-heavy brass. It has such great control over the volume. The return to the main melody up the scale, it's an incredible moment, but it's also balanced in the slower moments, from the airy fragments and mournful strings on Dowager to the layered vocal harmonies on Something Helpful, to the odd melodic mirroring on Honeyed Voices, to the heartbreakingly powerful strings arrangement on Blackfriars, where the only electronic piece is the ticking of a clock, showing time slipping away. We'll come back to this when we're discussing themes, but I might as well mention the few minor gripes I did have with the composition and production I have with this album, but really they're perfunctory at best. While Meredith's willowy vocals work just fine on this record, I wasn't quite as wild about some of the male vocals from the two singers she brought on, as they didn't really add much for me, especially on the higher tones on Dowager. And while I could nitpick on a couple tones, I wasn't really wild about the synth on Honeyed Words, in which a few more of the guitars have a little bit more muscle behind them, but that's me coming from a rock atmosphere. The only song that somewhat underwhelmed me compositionally was Something Helpful, where I feel the abrupt ending and the less complex melodic progression isn't quite as intense or interesting as the rest of this album, but make no mistake, that song made up for it, the lyrics, and where this album really caught me off guard is how well it came together on that thematic level. I've said in the past that lyrics are kind of perfunctory on most electronic records, but points must be given for lyrical cohesion and flow that could easily fit within the pop sphere, even if Meredith is aiming higher with this album. And initially, the themes seem a little bit tricky to parse out until those patterns becoming more apparent. Taken details relationship burning out in apocalyptic terms as old securities melt away, and Something Helpful shows disinterest and disconnect leading to a situation where even lies and friction can't restore the relationship and keep some contact together. But it's Dowager and Last Rose, so this album gets truly intriguing for me. In the latter case, showing a rose where everything has decayed and died in the garden around it, mirroring that protagonist's own loneliness, which is accented even further on Dowager. In this case, you get a series of bird metaphors showing how time and nature has stolen away beauty and the widow's husband, and an increasing disconnect between eagles and robins, royalty and those common folk, leaving the lonely Dowager trying to find something to occupy her time, playing to take to the sky and perhaps crash down upon the world from an implied tower to an uncertain landing. And that's where the metaphors take the most shape and scale. How the classical instrumentation takes lower, deeper, even minor progressions against gleaming electronics and guitars that seem overflowing with life. The old order and old sound being replaced by the new. The institutions are crumbling, the horns call out for the great unknown that rises out of the deep, and while there is beauty in the old ways that should be remembered, holding on to the archaic without purpose only prolongs the unnecessary misery as implied in the lyrics. This record does such a phenomenal job of capturing the mingled emotions that come through those changes. Rage and fear, grief and wistfulness for those old times, and yet excitement and exaltation as well. It's such a powerful blend and it feels so cohesive, it's amazing. Hell, if you really wanted to stretch, given how Anna Meredith has pivoted away from classical music in her previous career to embracing more electronic elements, you could say it's her own commentary on her own artistic transition, but you know what, that might be the sort of overthinking that she herself might frown upon in the classical scene, so let's keep this simple. I love Varmints by Anna Meredith. The organic swell blended with the technical precision that at the end of the day relies on simple, brilliantly arranged patterns. The writing is sharp and emotive, the themes stark and powerful, and the climaxes are some of the best you will hear this year. For me, it's a light 9 out of 10, but as a recommendation, whew, folks, I won't mince words, this is an intimidating album, but give it the time and listens and you will most certainly be rewarded. So definitely check this out. So yeah, thanks a lot for watching. I'd like to like and subscribe, I'd be more than grateful. I got the poll up there, so what did you think about this album? Rate out of 10, I got a number of options. I'd love to hear your feedback, because this, again, challenging record. But outside of that, anything else I might be able to do to improve my presentation, or any other albums coming out that you want me to take a look at, I'd be glad to give them a listen. Till then, I'm Mark, you're watching Spectrum Pulse, and I'll see you next time.